And so the long march of the Psalms continues. We are on 103, which is titled, Bless the Lord, O my soul, of David. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your iniquity, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with steadfast love and mercy, who satisfies you with good so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. The Lord works righteousness and justice for all those who are oppressed. He made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the people of Israel. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. He will not always chide, nor will he keep his anger forever. He does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love towards those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far does he remove our transgressions from us. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him. For he knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. As for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field, for the wind passes over it, and it is gone, and its place knows it no more. But the steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear him, and his righteousness to children's children, to those who keep his covenant and remember to do his commandments. The Lord has established his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom rules over all. Bless the Lord, O you his angels, you mighty ones who do his word, obeying the voice of his word. Bless the Lord and his hosts, his ministers, who do his will. Bless the Lord, all his works, and all his places of his dominion. Bless the Lord, O my soul. So what wisdom can we gain from this psalm? Let's pick it apart. So I find it interesting, this idea of the soul, specifically in reference to the way that David seems to refer to the soul. When he says, Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name, as though the soul was a different part of himself from the one that was speaking, the one that was the author of the psalm. And that's an interesting distinction. Perhaps there's not much to explore there, but I think it is important, because I think the soul is something that is more than just the I. And the I itself, I think, can present itself in different ways. The I can be driven by an inflated ego. The I can be a righteous thing. But the soul almost seems to imply not only a totality of the being that is the human being, including the body and the mind, but also the specific part of the mind that's most honest with itself, the deepest part of the I, the deepest part of the eye that allows it to be. Now, there are many eyes out there, including my own, myself, that get in the way of the soul. It often desires rest, as if the rest would be something that would satisfy it in the long term, or rather I should say, and most importantly here, that this rest would bring it closer into being, into a form of existence, a way of life that is unbothered by the self. This pure expression of the soul. And I think, at least for my own part, going through these Psalms has been something of it gives me a certain perspective through which I can see the self and its relation to my soul, which is, again, I'm viewing this as the source of my being, the sort of thing that is given to all of conscious beings. I should say, well, the conscious being in the sense that can appreciate the heavenly principle like the human being. If we consider this soul and we appeal to it, just as David has here, we appeal to this thing, the source of our being, and we ask of it to bless the Lord. We ask it to praise, to worship, to glorify. The source of our being. It's sort of an interesting perspective. If the soul is the source of our being, then the source of our soul's being is through God. And I think through this conceptualization, it's almost as if we can peer from this I that is myself here, that has all these difficulties. It's burdened by its fallen nature. It has all of its inferior base desires wound up in it. It gives in to the emotional argumentation, again, to move to a state of rest, in the false belief that this rest would provide this false hope that the soul will enlarge, and that through whatever I may engage in, whether it be playing a video game or eating something I really shouldn't be eating, entering into the state of being where I feel at ease, is false. Because it's temporary, number one. Number two, it does not do anything truly to broaden the scope of the soul. It just satisfies the base desires, and these base desires give us the illusion of the satisfaction of the soul, which really can only be satisfied through true meaning and purpose. We can peer again from this I down into our soul, which is the place of being, this connectedness, this place of fulfillment, of love. And as we enter into this pure space, and there are many ways that one can enter there, I can imagine. The trick, of course, is being truthful and understanding that although there are many different avenues for man, many different paths to walk, there are right ones and there are wrong ones. And unfortunately, in our blindness, I think we may miss the right path even though we have good intentions. However, that being said, returning to the idea of the I moving into unity with the soul of being, the totality of the individual, as it lines up with that, we will be in a true state of rest. But I want to explore this idea further, because what is the soul in an absolute state of despotism, without any education, without any knowledge of God, without any formal training in language? This is surely a primitive human being. And I do not think that this form of man is sufficient enough, capable enough, of understanding the difference between the soul and the I, or the satisfaction of the I. And even further, I would have to wonder if this I has not an important role to play in the evolution of the understanding of the soul itself. Because, after all, it is a part of it. And as we have explored in previous episodes, just like as in the evolution of thought, every new innovation adds to our existing framework. We don't usually come out with an entirely different framework unless a miracle happens. We are always under the supervision of natural law, which is under the supervision of the divine law. But having said that, and exploring this idea of the self and its relationship to the soul, and how it may be able to influence it through its own will, I would say that the role that the I has to play is fundamental. Because if the soul is not pure, then the soul will not see God. And if the soul cannot see God, then how can it be with God? And so, this process of reading the Psalms, reading biblical teachings, reading the paths that others have taken, and learning from their experiences, is the way that the self guides the education of the soul so that it can move into oneness, let's say, with the divine being. And when it does so, then we truly can take rest, whatever that might look like. But the trick, at least from my own personal perspective, now is aligning this I and make it so that it is willingly and completely surrendered to the path of improving the volume of the soul, the illumination of the soul, the window of the soul through which I can view the divine nature. And again, in so doing, I can be forgiven of my transgressions and my iniquities. And I can, in such a case, in such a dismissal of my crimes in the court of the divine, I can truly be liberated. And so, this is what I think of when I think of David appealing to his soul and asking it to bless the Lord. We have this sort of three-dimensional thing here. the I, the individual soul, and the divine being. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. Because if we forget his benefits, if we forget that which forgives our iniquity, heals our disease, who redeems our life from the pit. Again, the pit is this place of darkness for which the conscious perception of reality is dim and dulled, and therefore our experience in reality is dimmed and dulled. And that infects everything like a disease. It is a disease. If we forget that which crowns us with steadfast love and mercy, who satisfies us with good and renews our youths, then we are doomed to fail, I think. Not only in terms of a group of people, not only at all the various levels of groups, all the way up until the group of the species, but also down to the level of the individual, as we've discussed. And so we must always exalt, adore, remember God's steadfast love, and all of the adjectives that I had mentioned that we should not forget. The Lord works his righteousness and justice for all who are oppressed. Now this is under true oppression, not under the guise of those that wish to be the oppressors themselves, like we find in our society today. We have to be very careful not to fall into that trap. He made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the people of Israel. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. He will not always chide. This word chide, I believe, means to scold or to rebuke. Nor will he keep his anger forever. He does not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his steadfast love towards those who fear him. Now, in what way does God not deal with us according to our sins, nor repay us according to our iniquities? Certainly this does not mean punishment, because certainly there is punishment for sin. But this punishment, I think, is a way of teaching us of what the good is, of what the truth is. For if there were no consequences, there would be no right and there would be no wrong. But there certainly are consequences in life. As far as the east is from the west, so far does he remove our transgressions from us. As a father shows compassion to his children, So the Lord shows compassion to those who fear him, for he knows our frame and remembers that we are dust. And so this verse here, verse 14, for he knows our frame. He knows our makeup. He knows our everything about us. He is the creator, the painter of this painting, the painter of this landscape, this reality that we inhabit. And he remembers that we are dust. Now for some reason, I feel a bit of Nietzsche here. A bit of his soul talking to me. It's a bit faint, his voice, but I hear him. I feel him. I feel him when I read, for he knows our frame, he remembers that we are dust. It's a difficult thing, existence. It's a difficult thing to find where we belong. At times it can be difficult to justify. But it gives us a certain perspective, I think. To understand the divine mind's place in all of this. And the conception of something inferior to that mind. And just as a father, a good father, or a good mother, views their child as something that is always at once inferior, but also so loved that anything would be done for that child, so that they would feel, or perhaps that they would know, that they are loved. And so despite the fact that we are inferior beings, and that our life and our existence is temporary, I think just like this father and mother, God loves us in this way. As for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field. For the wind passes over it, and it is gone, and its place knows it no more. But the steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear him, and his righteousness to children's children, to those who kept his covenant and remember to do his commandments. The Lord has established his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom rules over all. And so there you go. This is a bit of what we were talking about. So in verse 15, as for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field. These are all things that point to the temporary, transitory nature of man. For the wind passes over it, and it is gone, and its place knows no more. This is the key verse. The wind passes over it. It passes over the field for which the grass grows. And of course, in this analogy, the grass is akin to the days of man. His flourishing is like a flower in the field, at once numerous, but also temporary. It blooms, it folds, and it dies. It blooms, it folds, and it dies. And this wind passes over it. This wind is the Spirit of God, because it is above, of course, that which is below. But it is also this quickly moving thing, this unseen thing. Unlike the condition of the grass and the flowers that are fixed to the earth, the wind is not. It's this liberated force, this divine cognition, we could say, this divine mind. It sweeps over all of us. It passes us by. It outlives us. And its place knows it no more. So there's a lot of it and its in these verses, and it can be kind of difficult to understand exactly what it's referring to. But if we are to start from the beginning here, verse 16, for the wind passes over it, it refers to the days of man. The Spirit of God passes over the days of man. And it is gone. The days of man are gone. In that moment in time, if we are to use the linear conception of time, both the wind and the day of man, if we are to consider the individual and his perception and all of his learning throughout his life, at that moment it is gone. And its place knows it no more. And then comes in the beauty. But the steadfast love of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear him, and his righteousness to children's children, to those who kept his covenant and remembered to do his commandments. The Lord has established his throne in the heavens, and his kingdom rules over all. Bless the Lord, O you his angels, you mighty ones who do his word, obeying the voice of his word. Now this is the appeal of man to the beings that are above him, but below God, the sort of intermediate realm of beings. This funny thing for the inferior being to check the higher. But even we recognize the fallen nature of angels. Bless the Lord, all his hosts, his ministers, who do his will. Bless the Lord, all his works. In all places of his dominion, bless the Lord, O my soul. Psalm 104. O Lord my God, you are very great. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. He lays the beams of his chambers on the waters. He makes the clouds his chariot. He rides on his wings of the wind. He makes his messengers winds, his ministers a flaming fire. He set the earth on its foundations, so that it should never be moved. He covered it with the deep, as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they took to flight. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down, to the place that you appointed for them. You set the boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. You make springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Beside them, the birds of the heavens dwell. They sing among the branches. From your lofty abode, you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. You cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. The trees of the Lord are watered abundantly, the cedars of Lebanon that he planted. In them the birds build their nests. The stork has her home in the fir trees. The high mountains are for the wild goats. The rocks are refuge for the rock badgers. You made the moon to mark the seasons. The sun knows its time for setting. You make darkness, and it is night, when all the beasts of the forest creep about. The young lions roar for their prey, seeking their food from God. When the sun rises, they steal away and lie down in their dens. Man goes out to his work and to his labor until evening. O Lord, how manifold are your works! In wisdom have you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Here is the sea, great and wide, which teems with creatures innumerable, living things both small and great. There go the ships, and Leviathan, which you formed to play in it. These all look to you, to give them their food in due season. When you give it to them, they gather it. They gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works, who looks on the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have being. May my meditation be pleasing to him, for I rejoice in the Lord. Let sinners be consumed from the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Praise the Lord. Now this one I think is going to take some time to unpack. There's a lot of wisdom in this one. And so as is our habit of late, we refer to the title before we begin. O Lord my God, you are very great. And so we know that what is coming, what is to be said by the author of this psalm, is of the greatness of God. And so we begin fairly traditionally. Bless the Lord, O my soul. O Lord my God, you are very great. And as we remember the little introduction that I gave for the last psalm about exactly what it means to appeal to the soul, to ask for the eye, to ask the soul to bless the Lord. You are clothed with splendor and majesty, covering yourself with light as with a garment, stretching out the heavens like a tent. And so what can we say of this imagery? What can we say of this splendor and this majesty that is analogous to light, illumination, again to the conscious mind of man? This is the ability for us to understand when the light finds us. We are able to see. And again, in this seeing, we understand, we know. We have confidence in. Or in other words, we have faith. So to be clothed in this majesty and this splendor, in some sense, majesty is sovereignty. It is authority, it is power, it is dominion. It's something that expresses dignity, beauty. And from this divine source, it spreads out the heavens like a tent. Now the tent is an object that is designed to cover what lies within it. It provides it protection. It gives a home to those that dwell within it. Now it's difficult in my mind sometimes to imagine the extent of the heavenly realm, because so far, to our knowledge, the human being is the only thing capable. It has the only engine, the only mechanism capable of perceiving the possibility of its existence. And so with my modern mind, I immediately go into the realm of the material. I think of the universe and the vastness of space, the planets that are within it, the numerous stars, the almost improbability that we are the only intelligent beings out there. But this is not to say that because of this proposition or potentiality that there may be other intelligent forms of life out there is not a proof for the heavenly domain. It only makes it likely that those beings are to share their visions of the heavenly domain. Now, the heavenly domain has to do with levels of being. In a certain sense, the levels of perception of reality. Now, exactly where that leads us, I'm not entirely sure. But when we go on our finer ideals, love, truth, justice, beauty, righteousness, we find this realm. We are more apt, we are more easily able to measure the effects of these heavenly spirits, of the heavenly beings on man. But I should back up and say, we're not talking about the heavenly beings. We're talking about heaven itself. And when I ask the question, where is it? I don't think that's the right question. It's like saying, where is my mind? And I don't mean, where is my brain? I mean, where is my mind? Where is the result of all of these chemical processes that come together to produce this consciousness, the consciousness that is thinking these thoughts, recording them into this computer, and trying to conceptualize of something greater than itself. There's no answer for it, because there is no where. It's the wrong question. I think the question that we should be asking is, if it is indeed the case that the heavens are spread out before us, or I should say over us, like this analogy to the tent, then we lie within it. And so it's not a matter of where, for we know where it is, in a certain sense, of course. Just like, in a certain sense, I know where my mind is, and in another sense, in the concrete sense, I can't quite tell you where it is. I can't give you a direction or coordinates on a map where it is. Of course, it is where I am, but where I am and where my brain is, this produces mind, but mind is not located there. Because again, it has made not the jump, not the leap, but the transition from one point of knowledge into another. Now, for the sake of tying this thread of thought and running the risk of certain falsities within that statement, I will leave it there as a place to return to. And so let's return now, the stretching out of the heavens like a tent. He lays the beams of his chambers on the waters. And so here we have the beams, this image of stability and structure that are upon the waters. And the waters being a symbol of, they can be a symbol of confusion. They can be a symbol of destruction. A symbol of change, of quick change. A symbol of time. In giving this structure to this symbol, again, the transformative nature of time, the fluid nature of water, to give it structure, I think, is to almost inherently give it attention, to give it intelligibility, to give it direction. And here we don't see the human being yet. We see God's chambers on the waters. And so this sort of thing I imagine to be something akin to the patterns of nature laying themselves out. As God is the author of this grand narrative. And into this narrative is born the understanding of these patterns, the repeating of these patterns. The fundamental patterns, the beams and the waters, the patterns of stability, the patterns of rest, of transformation and of change and of destruction, of recycling. He makes the clouds his chariot, so that which floats above is that which carries him. Again, that which floats above, just like the cloud, is that which carries God. And so what can we say of this above? Well, it's just like mind. It's not really a matter of where it is. It's a matter of how to perceive. And so just as our minds, again, everything that is within it, the soul, the eye, this is elevated above the brain, above the body. It has authority over it. And in this way, the clouds are above us. The Spirit of God is above the mind of man. And so just as we were describing before about the eye and its relationship to the soul, and the soul's relationship to God, so too is this analogy of the mind. It is the mechanism by which we can perceive of something that is higher than itself. He rides on the wings of the wind. Again, the wings of the wind. So the wings of a bird are the physical objects, or the physical structure, the biological structure of the animal that allows it to assume flight. In a sense, it carries it. It allows it to fly. And so, what allows the wind to fly God rides upon this. And so it's a very interesting image, because what allows the wind or the breath of intelligibility to flow is almost seemingly an inferior being to that of the being that rides upon it, which is God. And so I think what we see here is a mechanism. It's another mechanism of nature. That is how this is possible for that which carries intelligibility to be brought into this reality. And it's that mechanism and that pattern that God sits upon. It's almost like I suppose like language. And we have the ability to speak. Our ability to speak, in a sense, is the wings of our breath, right? It's that which carries the voice from us to the world. And God, in this analogy, would be the human mind producing sounds that produce meaning into the breath. That becomes this language. That becomes this mode by which we can communicate with one another, and to perceive, and to form close relationships, to understand love, to find purpose, and again to find meaning. He makes his messengers winds, his ministers a flaming fire. And so just as we were describing earlier, we see here in verse 4 just this very idea. He makes his messengers winds. So a messenger is somebody that carries the words of, the letter of somebody, an author that had wrote it. And it's through this messenger that this letter and the information, more specifically, is delivered to its endpoint. And so for a messenger to be wind, we have to imagine what wind is. It is this force of air that blows. It is something that we cannot see. It's something that we can feel. It's something that we can pick up by our senses, let's say. The sense of profound belonging and of meaning. This is how we capture the wind of God. This is how we capture the messenger of God. Just as I can move my finger across this microphone, I can feel it, and I can understand it, not only by seeing it, but through the sensors in my fingers that relay that information to my brain. And in that same way, I could sense the messenger of God, the information of the divine. His ministers a flaming fire. Now, a fire is something that illuminates. It's also something that burns. And so a minister, that which relays the message of God, the person that relays the message of God, for this to be like a fire, this is the illumination of understanding. It is the orientation of mind towards something that is finally understandable. You know, in my day-to-day, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and how it relates to the state of our current culture. This is January of 2023. And it's not in any particular harsh judgment that I make this observation, but rather I just listen and I see and I hear. There's an air of superficiality to all of our interactions. And that's not to say that every interaction has to be particularly profound. But we seem to be creatures that are devolving into a state of being and a state of attentiveness that favors, again, this superficiality and this baseness. And there's no, or very seldom, is there a recognition of the true purpose of things, of the true way of things, or even wanting to find the true way of things. It's always about the here and now, about the fleeting experience. And so when I hear the minister and the flaming fire, I wonder how we are to last without this flaming fire. We are to last for a while in the embers of a flame that once burned bright and hot. but eventually it'll extinguish, and again we will find ourselves in the darkness. He set the earth on its foundations, so that it should never be moved. You covered it with the deep, as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. Now this is the fundamental bit here. So we have all of this language about the mechanism by which the divine mind sends his influence down into this reality that human beings experience. It's as if it comes down to us by the very, encoded within the very fabric of our reality, within the very natural law, natural makeup within our physics, our biology, our chemistry. Therein lies the ability for these patterns to manifest and to become intelligible by conscious beings. And so that which is above carries God. He set the earth on its foundations. Again, this sort of law of nature, so that it should never be moved. And so it will never be moved in the sense that it will never break its own laws. It will never deceive itself into being something different than it is, than it was designed to be. And so for that reason, we can expect consistency from any divine source, because by the mode by which it reaches us will follow these laws. You covered it with the deep, as with a garment. And so I'm not entirely sure what this means here. I'm trying to think of what the author might have meant when he said, you covered it with the deep, as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. Because we know in Genesis that this entire process of producing an intelligible reality for human beings, or for any being, is sort of the uncovering of this deep, and to bringing into it this light, bringing it into the Spirit of God, hovering over the waters, hovering over the chaos and the continual change and uncertainty, having no true foundation for this progression of nature. And so when the author says you covered it with the deep, as with a garment, he may be referring to covering the very fundamental qualities of nature in this sort of garb that humanity has difficulty seeing. And the water stood above the mountains. That is to say that stability, structure, this foundation was not yet seen. It was covered by the force of time, and this continual cyclical renewal, death, birth, renewal type cycle. But the author does say, at your rebuke they fled, at the sound of your thunder they took flight. And so I take back what I said about verse 6, the beginning. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. Because I do not believe that now, after reading this next verse, that the author, due to his ignorance of nature, felt that God covered it with the deep to hide it from human eyes. This is not what he means. Because verse 7, at your rebuke they fled. It means the deep was uncovered. Or rather, I should say that the covering of the deep was lifted. The waters moved below the mountains. The intelligibility of reality unveiled itself, or made itself known, I should say. The veil was lifted from it. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place that you appointed for them. And so here we see this hierarchy form, things taking their proper place. So we have this verticality that is now represented. We have the higher heights and the lower lows. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. And so that is to say, I think here, this is stretching my mind a bit, but the boundary, I believe, is necessary to retain reality itself. Because in order to differentiate one thing from another, there has to be a boundary that separates them. And so just like the mountains and the valleys are two distinct things, the boundary that was set by the mountain, by its very nature, and by the valley by its very nature, they cannot cross each other. The valley cannot become the mountain cannot become the valley. Because if they did, then the deep would come back and cover it again. And the reason it would do this is because there is no ability to differentiate between the mountain and the valley. There is no boundary. And you cannot have an intelligible universe without these boundaries. It's a very simple principle, but I think it's quite effective. It's fundamental. Certainly something that I take for granted. He makes springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Beside them the birds of the heavens dwell. They sing among the branches. From your lofty abode you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. And so here we see a lot of earthly representation. And I believe at this point that these earthly examples are sort of literal examples. Now there's some exceptions within these few verses here, but for the most part, after discussing this idea of the boundaries, of their fundamental nature, for anything to exist at all, for anything to exist independent of something else, this boundary must be there. And the reason for this is the divine hand. And so we see the springs gush forth in the valleys. They flow between the hills. They give drink to the beasts of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Then we move into something different. Beside them, the birds of the heavens dwell. They sing from among the branches. So these are, in one hand you can interpret this as the literal birds that are chirping in the trees. Or in another sense, the birds of the heavens are sort of like the animals of heaven. These sort of conscious, but also not conscious in the same way that human beings are conscious. So they have this sort of independent existence. They come down to the earth. And they have their action. But their mode of existence isn't quite like the existence of man. This is one possible interpretation. And so they sing from among the branches. And this singing, it gives it meaning and purpose. These are fundamentally the heavenly spirits, the ones that come down to give some sort of perspective. Now, given that they are inferior to God, some of them can be dangerous. They can be patterns of being and patterns of persuading conscious, intelligent beings like man into false paths. They can infect them. They can prey on your feelings, make you mistake your feelings for rational thought, or your feelings for the ultimate guide for what one ought to do. From your lofty abode, you water the mountains. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of your work. Now, literally, watering the mountains would be to enrich the springs that flow from the mountains. But to give it meaning and to give it purpose, to give it some design, would be to say that God provides for this natural creation. God enriches the majesty of the mountain, which again would mean to inject this meaning and this being into the understanding of these patterns, of the pattern of majesty, to enhance the pattern of majesty, let's say. That is the symbol of the mountain, and the water as a source of enrichment. So God enhances this majesty. Now much of the remainder here of this psalm really hammers home the process of differentiation. Moreover, from this process of differentiation, through various boundaries, I think we see within the boundaries a given place. So verse 14 says, "You cause the grass to grow for the livestock, and plants for man to cultivate." And so here we see one thing that serves a purpose for another. The grass for the livestock, the plants for man to cultivate. The oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart. In the example of the trees of the Lord are watered abundantly. The cedars of the Lebanon that he planted, in them the birds build their nests. So again, the tree that was watered by God, it serves a purpose. And in this particular purpose, it is a home for the birds, a home for the stork and the fir trees. The mountains are for the wild goats. The rocks are a refuge for the rock badgers. And if we zoom out even farther, if we consider the moon is made to mark the seasons. Now we have to remember the purpose that particular objects in our reality serve, not only to us, but other objects, to other animals in the environment. And we have to separate that from how we know these objects to have come into existence through their natural evolution. The two are entirely different realms of understanding. It is my argument that the former, the one of the meaning and readily intelligible to the human mind, is that of the meaning, that of the recognition of patterns. And so when we see the moon, and we see the pattern of the moon, and we see how this relates to the seasons, we see a pattern, we see a purpose in it, and we use it for this higher purpose. It doesn't necessarily mean that it came to be expressly for this purpose, but rather we have found within it the patterns that it inhabits in our reality, and we are free to use these patterns as we see fit. The sun knows its time for setting. And so this reference of the sun knowing its time for setting, this knowing, I think, directly implies the sun following fixed natural laws. For if it did not know this, in the sense of it does so because it is in line with its being, let's say. It is not a conscious entity. I have no doubt that the ancient people understood this, for the most part. But at least the people here, for they understood that there was a higher God, or rather I should say, something that exists above the sun to provide it its law by which it behaves, by which it submits to. And to zoom out even farther, more fundamental, you make darkness, and it is night, when all the beasts of the forest creep about. The young lions roar for their prey, seeking their food from God. When the sun rises, they steal away and lie down in their dens. Man goes out to his work and to his labor until evening. And so we have to remember exactly what we are talking about here. we came from a fundamental place. In verse 5, he set the earth on its foundations, so that it should never be moved. You covered it with the deep, as with a garment. The water stood above the mountains. At your rebuke, they fled. At the sound of your thunder, they took flight. The mountains rose. The valleys sank down to the place that you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. And then we go into all these various sort of material examples, the examples that we experience in our everyday, the directly observable. And so I think it's worth mentioning to reinforce the idea that it is the belief of these people that whatever exists outside of the natural order of our universe, that this source was responsible for setting in motion the very laws that we experience. And moreover from the laws, moreover from the movement of the celestial bodies in reference to the sun and the moon, but also in terms of the incredibly complex life that emerged from following these natural laws, and given its increasing complexity, the patterns of interaction between them. And so in my mind here, I unfortunately fall into the popular thought. And there's no reason for me to do so, but I often think about the materialist argument or the scientific argument against the religious argument, religious understanding. And for the life of me, I understand the antagonism, but it just seems to be something that is so limiting and so unnecessary. Because we are talking about the fundamental framework of mind, of the human mind, that allows the very interpretation of our objective reality to exist. O Lord, how manifold are your works! In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Here is the sea, great and wide, which teems with creatures innumerable, living things both great and small and great. There go the ships and the Leviathan, which you formed to play in it. And so that those 3 verses there are fairly straightforward. These all look to you, to give them their food in due season. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. Now this again, we see this dovetailing between this material understanding of all that exists before us, and then back into this purposeful thinking, principled thinking. The reason why we perceive at all. And so when it says these things all look to you, or these all look to you, to give them their food in due season. When you give it up to them, they gather it up. Especially when it says, when you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take their breath away, they die and return to their dust. I don't believe that this is literal. This is not literally some divine hand, just as my hand can reach down and pick something up from my desk to take it away from the desk. But rather, it's as if the ink of a pen has run out. And once the ink of this pen has run out, I can no longer write with it. I can no longer use it for its purpose. And in this way, the breath has been taken from it, and it has died. It can no longer fulfill this purpose for which it was designed. And the human mind, I think, is similar. So when we reach our natural conclusion, and we die, or perhaps we succumb to disease, and the mind no longer can withstand the disease and succumbs to it. It faces a type of death all the same, as is the case with severe dementia or something like this. The human being no longer fulfills its purpose. It no longer has the breath of God that's within it, which is the software to run the consciousness and ability to interpret the reality that lies before them. And so, when the Spirit is sent forth, and they are created, and the face of the ground is renewed, this is, I think, the result of a design, a sort of like a setting up of dominoes. It's a design for which the organizer understands what will happen when they return to the beginning to knock down the first domino, and they enjoy watching the cascade of events unfold. Except at various twists and turns of this cascade of falling dominoes, branches appear, given the complexity of the design, and these branches form their own independence. And I think it is in this way the Spirit was transmitted kinetically through each individual domino piece, even though one domino piece hits another. And the evidence for this initial strike is not really seen, observed, or felt, because all we can see is one domino striking another. I think in the zoomed out view of the thing that set up the law or the configuration of these dominoes, and the very force that pushed over the first domino, is of particular interest to the religious mind. And I think that this sort of death, birth, renewal type cycle gives a certain majesty to the sophistication for the the setup of this domino-like trajectory. Because in the case of the dominoes, the analogy is inherently limited, because once they're not all knocked over, then the obvious thing left to do is for the creator that set everything in motion to set it all back up again. But within our system, it's much more self-reliant, it's self-correcting, it's autonomous in a certain sense. The human being being the ultimate form of that, at least that we can understand so far. This thing that has the freedom of will to continue its own species. I mean, all animals can do this. But the human being in particular, with its reasoned mind and its ability to inject creativity into the environment. And again, this is almost ad nauseum, to inject intelligibility into it, to use what is around us for a greater purpose. And it's almost as if what was set in motion started from a single point, and it began to expand outward into increasing volume. And there were certain aspects of this process that, just like a sinusoidal wave on a graph, it goes up, it comes down, returns to a point, and it's within, and it comes back up again, it returns to a point, and it comes back down again, and returns to this point. And these crossing points are sort of these, in my mind at least, these divergent, or convergent, I should say, they are convergent onto some form of unity, whether it be from a formation of a planet, understanding that the universe comes together from this super density of gases and explodes out into everything that we see before us. There are no shortage of different unities that we can see in terms of planets and suns and, I should say, stars. And when it comes to us, and I would have to imagine that there are a few others out there, it comes to even more elevated form of unity, that the universe itself begins to produce light within it. But I can't help but to imagine that this light was given to it by some outside force. The funny thing is, there's many people these days that believe in the the simulation theory. And it's such a bizarre thing to believe in the simulation theory, because essentially what it is just God creating a simulation. But instead of using the massive tradition that the ancients used, thousands of years of pattern recognition, they deny it for something completely different. They think, I guess it's because it's new, it's fresh, it's free from all the sin of man before it, but it's hubristic, I think, to think that way. Essentially, it's the same type of thinking to get there, to think that there's something outside of the universe that designed what we experience now. So may the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works, who looks on the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will praise to my God while I have being. May my meditation be pleasing to him, for I rejoice in the Lord. Let sinners be consumed from the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Bless the Lord, O my soul. Praise the Lord. And so I believe this second half of this podcast has fallen a bit short. And so I like to inject maybe a few minutes of humanity here at the end before I end it. And I would like to start by saying I'm sorry. I'm sorry to the world that's before me, to all the people that are in it, to everything that is above it. And I want to say I'm sorry for my existence and how short I fall of living up to the potential, of living up to everything that I've been given, and of almost trampling it beneath my feet in my weakness, under the yoke of my own delusion. I think that this limitation, this self-destructive behavior, is sinful, and it's one that requires an apology. Because the I within myself recognizes the importance of being and of finding meaning and fulfillment and of finding purpose. But just so often within my life that, at least at its inception, the younger I, with the more inflated ego, set his own cascade of dominoes into play without really understanding the consequences of it in the future. And as the dominoes fall, I try to rid myself of the designs of the younger man for the designs of the righteous man, for the man that chooses to live upright, for the man that chooses to recognize the totality of what my mind can experience love to be, and understand what it means to be just, understand what it means to be humble, and do so truthfully, and to prevent myself from judging others in the wake of my own failures, and understand that I am human, and therefore I am weak. And this is something that I carry with me, but it shall not be an excuse to use to keep me in a state of absolute weakness, or to give it, or to use it as an excuse not to try harder, and not to be better. And so with that, I end this episode. Next time I'll continue with Psalm 105, tell of all his wondrous works.